Oh, hello, we're in John's Gospel, chapter 19, and we now come to the death of Jesus. So we'll read from verses 28 to 37, reading from the ESV. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. Then Jesus had received the sour wine. He said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled, not one of his bones will be broken. And again another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. So, obviously we're now at a very sombre stage of things. Jesus says, I thirst, and he was given a jar full of some sour wine. Now this is put to fulfill probably reference to Psalm 69 verse 21, where it says, they put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. Earlier, if you look in Mark 15:23, I think it is, he was offered some wine and refused it. That was a different sort of wine. It was wine which had a probably fairly mild sedative effect, and some maybe ease the pain a little. Jesus refused to take that. He experienced the full horror, physical horror, and of course, as we mentioned before, the even worse horror of being rejected by God, or taking the wrath of God upon him, upon himself. Then it says, after receiving this, he said, it is finished. That can seem a bit tame. I think the Greek word is tetelestai, something like that, which was kind of a victory cry when a military conquest has been completed. Jesus' work of paying for our sin had been completed. It says he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Elsewhere it says, Jesus says, I lay my life down. Jesus' life was not taken from him. He gave it up. And later, he will take it up again. Then we read about the Jews they've just killed the Son of God. But they're now fastidious. Oh, we need to get these bodies away from here. So we don't want them around there on the Sabbath. And it was a special Sabbath because it was the Passover. But they're so fastidious about the small things. Elsewhere, Jesus, I think it's in Matthew's Gospel, he criticises them. Look, you're giving tithes, you're bothered about a bit of mint, but you ignore looking after widows. It can kind of be a displacement activity, which we can all be prone to when we sin. Some of the small thing, we get over very keen on it, very fastidious about it, make sure we do this to try and assuage our conscience, try and pretend we're okay, really, but we're not. That's what the Jews are doing here. They've killed the Son of God. They want to make sure there's no dead bodies around on the Sabbath. So the soldiers come to break the legs, and that works because people would use their strength in their legs to try and lift their bodies up on the cross so they could continue to breathe. And when if the legs were broken, obviously they couldn't do that anymore. and they would very quickly die if they were dead already. They came to Jesus and they saw that he was dead. One of the more ludicrous alternative explanations of the resurrection is that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Well, one, it's nonsense. The Romans knew how to kill people. They were experts at two things they were experts at: building roads and killing people. And then they put the spear in his side. That shows, and the blood and water came out, shows that Jesus was well and truly dead. And John says here, he's sort of born witness. Look, he's telling you. People say the fact that Jesus, first, the very idea that Jesus didn't die is just nonsense. But then also, suppose he wasn't dead. Let's just suppose for a moment, what state would he be in? It's just a ludicrous suggestion. Jesus died on the cross. It says these things took place to fulfill the scripture. One, that not one of his bones will be broken. It could be a reference to Psalm 34. I think it's verse 20. Or it could be a more general reference that a sacrificed animal had to be perfect. Jesus is the perfect sacrifice. And then the one that they will look on him whom they have pierced is a reference to Zechariah 12 verse 10. So here we have, Jesus is dead.